To some breaking news now, when a 5.5 magnitude quake has rocked Bali. The tremor was centred about 20 kilometres east of Denpasar Airport. There aren't any major reports of damage. Locals and tourists say they were shaken for about 20 seconds.
Many tourists reported feeling a small shaking followed by a larger tremor, lasting about 20 seconds, which shook hotel rooms. Part of a temple gate at Gihan Temple in Bangli collapsed, but so far no major damage has been reported. In hotels across Bali, tourists were reported to have run outside as buildings shook. The violent quake was reportedly felt by up to 3 million inhabitants on and around the island.
Did it seem like we had an awful lot of tornadoes this winter? Well, you'd be right. We actually had the most tornadoes since 2008. That's for so far this year, at least, with a grand total of over 300 for the start of spring. Now, sadly, this high tornado count has resulted in the deaths of 24 people and over $2 billion in property damage. The strongest tornado so far this year ripped through Perryville, Missouri, and it was rated an EF4. Now, could this be a sign of what's to come? Does this mean that our spring is going to be out of control, crazy, scary, so many tornadoes? Well, not necessarily, but the message is clear. You should always be prepared for the worst when it comes to severe weather.
It's beginning to look a lot like snow, but it's not. That's hail in Cleveland, Georgia. That's in the north part of the state where severe thunderstorms rolled through Tuesday evening. As we go through Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, there's going to be more severe thunderstorms for the Deep South.
After a largely sunny day, the forecast storm smashed into Western Sydney around 4 p.m, bringing lightning, 80 km/h winds and flooding rain, 20 mils in 15 minutes. And hail. That was Rooty Hill. This is Parramatta.
I can only see that one building out there. The rest of it is white. This is the Parramatta, by the way.
One thunderbolt causing a fire in an electrical substation outside Toongabbie Public School. Power lines and trees were brought down. This at Mulgoa. A woman's car hit front and back, trapped as heavy traffic bore down.
So there was 2 trees on top of me. Lucky the truck didn't run up my bum, so I was okay there.
We were warned of a severe thunderstorm from the southwest, but it was hard to believe until those clouds rolled in.
So the wind was like over 100 k's, I reckon.
There was peak hour traffic chaos, roads closed by fallen power lines, trees and flooding.
I was just 1 minute of opening the door to get in my car to go to work. Hear a bang, down it came. Lucky I'm still here.
Traffic lights were knocked out by local power failures. 27,000 homes and businesses too at Castle Hill, Borkham Hills, Mount Druitt, Wayland, Blackett, Shelby, Rydalmere, mostly caused by lightning strikes. The SES took hundreds of calls for help. It could be hours before the backlog is cleared.
Heavy rains continue to wreak havoc in Peru. The floods have claimed at least 78 lives and a state of emergency has been declared covering half of the country. It is a result of record downpours which caused rivers to overflow, triggered landslides and left thousands homeless. Climate experts say it's due to the coastal El Niño phenomenon, with exceptionally warm water in the Pacific causing the torrential rains. In parts of Peru's northern coast, small villages have been totally cut off. Recently, I went to see my house, which is bad, really bad. I lost practically everything, and that is why I ended up here in this shelter. On the outskirts of Lima, Besenda had to abandon her home to the floods. I don't have water. I don't have light. The situation I'm going through, I'm 80 years old. As some begin the cleanup, forecasters warn the flooding is expected to continue for another 2 weeks.
The UK is following the United States lead in imposing a ban on certain electronics on a number of international flights. It's all due to a new kind of threat targeting aviation.
Fox News has learned that the security changes are based on multiple recent threat streams targeting the aviation sector. The enhanced security measures ban electronics larger than a smartphone inside the cabin of U.S.-bound flights from 10 international airports in the Middle East and North Africa. A similar action was announced by the British government. Cameras, e-readers, portable DVD players, laptops, and large electronic games must now travel in checked luggage. White House spokesman was pressed on the timeline and why the airlines were given 96 hours to comply.
You have to provide appropriate notification to the host country, to the host airlines, and give them opportunity to get those procedures in place. I think that implementing something of this nature in that time frame is pretty darn quick.
Both Al-Qaeda and ISIS have recently targeted commercial passenger jets. ISIS claimed responsibility for the October 2015 bombing of a Russian plane in Egypt, killing everyone on board. And in February 2016, the Al-Qaeda affiliate was blamed for a sophisticated laptop bomb that nearly brought down a jet in East Africa. The most notorious bomb maker is Al-Qaeda's Ibrahim al-Asiri, whose trainees include Europeans fighting for the terror group in Syria. Chairman McCall said it makes sense to act now.
Just like the shoe bomber, had we known about that beforehand, it wasn't until after the fact that we had people take their shoes off at airports. So this is, I think, a precautionary measure taken by the Secretary, and I think it's a wise one.
Tough times for those countering terrorism in Europe as the so-called Islamic State changes its strategy. From Iraq and Syria, the war now moving to the EU. The number of young radicalised people is increasing and some foreign fighters are returning. Olivier's son was 23 when he left Belgium for Syria, where he later died. For those who come back to Europe, Olivier says there needs to be reintegration programmes. It's delicate, he says, because we're afraid, because of the Brussels attacks, to take back people who are potentially dangerous. I bring the example of my son. If my son was still alive, what would I have done? I would have tried to help, by all means. According to official figures, around 30% of foreign fighters who left Europe have returned. 119 of those are in Belgium. For security forces, it's a new phenomenon to deal with, but investigators insist they are prepared.
We are ready, they're coming back, so to react on that and to have a prevention. Let's say, if they're coming by plane, we are aware. If they're coming by feet, let's say from Syria, it's difficult. If they cross the border, so we won't see it. But normally, so we have our traces, we're checking out this information and then we're working on that. So I don't think the threats, we're working on that, but never say never.
But facing these new challenges of the fight against terrorism seems to be hard for Belgium, where in addition to the difficult exchanges of information with the intelligence of other countries, there is also a lack of coordination between the internal security services, as denounced by the unions of the federal police.
Striking police say they're struggling to follow all leads, claiming they're 5,000 officers short of what they need. The National Security Plan is not fully staffed, he says. This has an impact on the management of information. We're afraid about missing information coming from all European countries, and that's available on the information crossroads because of a lack of staff. 1 year on after the Brussels attacks, it appears Belgium is still struggling to keep up with the ever-changing security threats.
Today, an Israeli Arab woman from the northern Israeli Arab town of Sakhnin has been sentenced to 50 months in prison for her involvement with the Islamic State in Iraq. Sabrine Zabidat, 30, traveled to Iraq with her husband Wissam and their 3 children, where the family spent over a year with the jihadist group before eventually escaping and making their way back to Israel. Zabitat is believed to have worked in an ISIS-run hospital, while her husband fought for the Islamic State and their 3 kids, aged 3, 6, and 8, attended a local school. Wissam Zabidat will be charged separately, however the investigation against him is still ongoing. Though the Islamic State does not have widespread support within Israel, the Shin Bet nonetheless estimates that 50 Arab Israelis have traveled to Syria or Iraq to join the Islamic State.
Breitbart.com has reported that in the city of Trollhättan, several Swedish police were attacked by a large gang of youths over the weekend. On Sunday evening, a group of around 20 to 30 young men rioted and caused havoc in the Kronagarden district of Trollhättan. Police say the youths were armed with rocks and fireworks, which they used to smash up a bus shelter. When police arrived on the scene, the gang attacked them with rocks that were so large they disabled their police car. Police struggled to get the situation under control, with the riot continuing for 3 hours until after 10 p.m. So far, none of the youths involved in the incident has been caught or arrested, and no one has been reported as being injured.
Almost half of Canadians reportedly want to deport people caught illegally entering the country from the United States. A Reuters Ipsos poll released March 20th finds that 48% of respondents want to send illegal border crossers back to the U.S. Meanwhile, only 36% of Canadians think the border crossers should stay. Canada has a reputation for being welcoming, but its residents appear nearly as divided as the United States when it comes to illegal entry. A similar Reuters Ipsos poll conducted last fall in the U.S. found that exactly 50% of Americans favored, quote, increasing the deportation of illegal immigrants.
Public lashings in accordance with Islamic Sharia law have been photographed in Indonesia. Several citizens were publicly lashed in the province of Aceh on March 20th. The photos were taken by the European Press Photo Agency. Sharia law is a justice system derived from a strict interpretation of Islam. Gay or extramarital sex, alcohol consumption, gambling, and other violations of this interpretation of Islam are punishable by public whippings. The masked man in the black robe has a title that translates in English to, quote, the executioner. Metro UK says the executioner used a cane to whip one man 8 times for gambling. A man and woman, both accused of having extramarital sex, were lashed 25 times. Another woman was whipped for spending time in close proximity with a man who was not her husband. A man accused of being a child molester was lashed 120 times.
The battle may be taking place in just a few streets, but it's as brutal as any in Syria. Intense fighting between opposition fighters and the regime in and around the Jobar and Kabun neighbourhoods in the northeast of Damascus started over the weekend. And most of it is taking place around a junction and a bus station, close to a strategic entrance into the heart of the capital. Both sides claim to be gaining ground.
Confrontations were fierce. We gained more land from here until near Kabun. We managed to confront them in the early hours of the morning. We were cautious. Even though they used car bombs, came out of tunnels and attacked in large numbers, we were able to fiercely stop them.
It started on Sunday when opposition groups led by Tahrir al-Sham, which is a group connected to the al-Qaeda-linked al-Nusra Front, launched a surprise assault. They fired mortar shells on nearby neighbourhoods, while the regime carried out airstrikes on opposition positions in Jobar and nearby eastern Ghouta. The regime also closed off the city's main Abbasian square and nearby roads. But despite the fighting, the rest of Damascus appears to be calm. Opposition fighters hope to capture parts of Jobar to open a passageway into districts in the north of Damascus besieged by the regime.
Just a few hours ago, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif warned that his country is ready to restart their nuclear program should the United States fail to live by its commitments under the July 2015 nuclear deal. Iranian state media quoted Zarif as saying, quote, "If the U.S. creates a situation that continuation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action would damage Tehran's national interest, then Iran is completely ready to come back to the situation it had prior to the JCPOA, even more powerfully than before," end quote. However, Zarif did reaffirm his nation's commitment to the nuclear deal reached under President Barack Obama. During his presidential campaign, Donald Trump and many top Republican legislators vowed to cancel the nuclear deal once in office. Since taking the presidency, however, Trump has wavered on his commitment to gut the nuclear deal that forces Iran to substantially limit their nuclear activities and submit to close inspections by the Atomic Energy Agency in exchange for the lifting of economic sanctions. Britain, China, France, Russia, and Germany, who also signed the JCPOA, openly oppose ending the agreement.
A White House official has said the Trump administration is reviewing whether the U.S. will keep its policy of supporting a world without nuclear weapons. Christopher Ford, the U.S. National Security Council Senior Director for Weapons of Mass Destruction, said an assessment of Washington's policy will examine whether the goal is realistic. Ford is the only senior nuclear policy official appointed by U.S. President Donald Trump since he took office in January Thursday. His comments are the first by a top administration official indicating the White House's stance on nuclear arms. Trump has already said he wants the U.S. to have an unrivaled nuclear arsenal. America is the only country that has used atomic bombs against another nation in the past.
On Tuesday, the North Korean Foreign Ministry claimed the country was not frightened by U.S. warnings of preemptive military action, describing its expanding nuclear program as a treasured sword of justice. In response to Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's comment on Friday that an elevated weapons threat from North Korea would be met with an appropriate response, a spokesman for the rogue regime said, "The world will soon witness what eventful significance the recent ground jet test of Korean-style high-thrust engine will carry. The nuclear force of North Korea is the treasured sword of justice and the most reliable war deterrence." Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, claimed that North Korea was the #1 threat to the U.S. and that military action remains an option if the regime fails to show cooperation.
A missile launched by North Korea appears to have failed, according to both US and South Korean officials. The apparent test on Wednesday came from an airbase on the country's east coast. It ended with an explosion seconds after the launch. Earlier this month, North Korea fired 4 ballistic missiles into the sea off Japan, angering both Seoul and Tokyo. Pyongyang is banned from any form of nuclear testing and accuses the US of trying to cut it off from the global financial system by trying to extend UN sanctions against it.
And with that, a U.S. lawmaker is pressing President Trump to slap secondary sanctions on Chinese companies that do business with North Korea. Ted Yoho, chairman of the White House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific, said Tuesday that Chinese entities continue to play an active role in Pyongyang's weapons development. He added that the U.S. needs to stop pretending that Beijing's North Korea policy is motivated by anything other than extreme self-interest. Yoho also slammed China for its opposition to the deployment of the THAAD missile defense system in South Korea. He said it was unacceptable for Beijing to take economic retaliation against South Korea. He said that is purely for the defense of South Korea, and China should instead focus on addressing the threat that makes it necessary.
As drones get cheaper and more powerful, even off-the-shelf consumer drones are being turned into weapons. Headlines about ISIS using them to drop bombs in Iraq, sending shockwaves through the drone industry. But the danger isn't just in war zones. Open-air stadiums with tens of thousands of sports fans here at home make perfect targets for the terrorists. Jazz Banga is the CEO and co-founder of Airspace Systems and worries that such an attack could come any day.
These drones started carrying going from grams of payload to pounds of payload. While they were great for photography, the ability for them to carry payloads and the speed that they were getting to and the longevity in the air, the duration in the air, was making them into poor man's cruise missiles.
Banga recruiting big names in Silicon Valley, including Guy Barnahum, one of the inventors of Apple's iPod. And it's not just Airspace Systems. At least 70 companies are now working on counter-drone technology. One major challenge: you can't just shoot a drone out of the air. The debris could injure those below. Even worse, what if the target drone carries a biological or chemical weapon? Airspace's solution? Firing a net to snare the target and bring it back to the ground. Airspace Systems hopes to start deploying its drone Hunter as soon as this summer. Some big stadium owners, including the New York Mets, as well as a government-run defense technology incubator, are already interested in the technology.
NBC News reports that a busy public restroom in China has begun deploying high-tech facial recognition technology to wipe out the problem of toilet paper theft. At Temple of Heaven, a popular tourist attraction in Beijing, users must stand for 3 seconds in front of a camera-equipped dispenser in order to receive a 2-foot section of bathroom tissue. The $1,000 machine will not dispense anymore to the same user for the next 9 minutes. A park manager told NBC News that the unusual restriction aims to cope with the behavior of taking toilet paper home, which is theft and abuse of a public resource.
The auto industry could be reshaped by a repossession device for cars.
Special technology makes a vehicle impossible to start after the owner misses a payment.
I got real sick.
Willie Connor needs a kidney transplant and gets dialysis 5 times a week. She needed a car, but she and her husband didn't have a lot of money. So commercials like this one for Car Credit City.
Get to Car Credit City for a guaranteed car and guaranteed credit today.
Offering guaranteed credit sounded good.
They made it easy, come on in, we'll give you a car, regardless of your credit.
That dealership is what's known as a buy here, pay here auto lender, which means the dealership does its own financing on transactions. The price was high. A 2007 Chevy with more than 100,000 miles would cost them over $21,000 after payments at almost 29% interest, nearly 6 times the national average.
But I had to get to dialysis. I have to get there or I don't live.
These are your grandkids. Then one day in 2012, she came out of the treatment center and found the car wouldn't start. Why? She says even though she had told them she would be a few days late on the payment, the dealer had turned the car off.
At dialysis of all places, they cut my car off.
How? With a device similar to this one. It's something called a starter interrupter, technology that, combined with GPS tracking, allows a dealer to remotely track the location of a car, then disable it from starting, as long as the car's not moving. Connor was left stranded. What did that make you feel like?
Like I was just failing at everything. Everything. My health, my life, everything was a failure.
This is the GPS tracking device.
Former car dealer Michael Fisher sells the devices. He says they're needed because many buyers with poor credit default on those high-interest loans.
It is a very risky business. I've been there. I lost a lot of cars, which I didn't even think was possible. I could find the customer. I just couldn't find the car.
But there are no federal laws on how to disclose or use the devices, and just 4 states have any regulations. And Chris Kukla with the Center for Responsible Lending says there are safety concerns.
You're on your way to pick your kids up, you stop at the store, and suddenly you can't start your car and your kids are left alone at a school. Or there are certainly stories of families where the mom was trying to get a kid to the emergency room and they got out to the driveway and they couldn't start their car.
Even Fisher says
the dealership should at least know where the vehicle's at when they're shutting it off.
And the problem, Kukla says, is people who wind up with the devices in their cars often don't have any other option but to accept them.
It's lower income consumers, it's folks with blemished credit who have trouble finding loans elsewhere. They really don't feel like they have an effective choice of whether to take these devices or not.
And Connor says for those who think it won't happen to them.
Who knew? I didn't know that this would happen to me. So you don't know until you've been there.
Denise Wilson is everyday people. She drives a bus in Milwaukee, and cameras installed by the county were rolling when she saw something on Center Street that kept her from finishing her shift. It was a 5-year-old boy with no shoes and barely anything on, wandering after midnight in the freezing cold. She decides to bring him in.
You okay? Still cold? Still a little cold?
She could have kept driving, let it be someone else's problem. She was on break. But instead, she searches her pockets for cash and then runs across the street to get the boy something to eat.
He came out of nowhere. I just happened to look over and heard him crying.
Police say the child had gotten away from his family by mistake and went home safely that night. And it's all thanks to a wonderful human being who's out driving the streets of Milwaukee this evening.
If we're there to help, we had ability or the means to do it, that's what we're supposed to do. Happy I made that stop. I always say God puts us in places, where he needs us at times.